Is it okay if I call you Mike, by the way, or would you prefer Michael?
It's perfectly fine.
Okay.
But Dominique has to call me Michelle.
Oh, there you All right, then.
Welcome to Skyline Entourage Offsite, a podcast where we explore everything events, experience, and marketing. For more than 20 years, Skyline Entourage has been designing custom exhibits and working with companies to produce their events worldwide. Join us as we discuss new ideas and chat with industry experts to bring you the latest.
So, Mike, I know you from Skyline. That's my first introduction to you. You're kind of, I would say, a heavyweight at Skyline. Everybody knows you. And when I first joined the team, I know there was a few people that we had to know, and you were definitely one of them. Not even just on sort of what your role at the company was, which you were at the director level at Skyline, but it's also just in the content that you put out. You're always like a great resource. So I'm really happy that our audience, our growing audience, hopefully as well, are going to sort of get a chance to listen in on what you have to say surrounding marketing, content marketing, trade shows. You're sort of versed in all of that. So kind of excited about that. But as I mentioned, you were director at Skyline, where you generated over 500,000 leads, resulting in $1 billion in sales, over $1 billion in sales, which is very, very impressive. You've published many white papers, exhibiting books and webinars. You've written 500 exhibiting marketing blogs. Definitely going to be a great resource, and I'm super excited. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and what you're focused on.
Well, what I've been doing before the pandemic was working with a lot of companies like Skyline Entourage, helping them with their marketing on a local level, using some of the same skills that I was using at Skyline, not necessarily all within the Skyline network, but mostly some working directly with exhibitors to help them with their marketing, also working with tech companies that want to be moving into the trade show space. I've had some work outside of the trade show industry, but it's been mostly that. And so a lot of similar things: content marketing, market research, search marketing, blogging. That's why that number keeps going up. Market strategy. Similar, but just evolution, because it does evolve. The marketing world's always changing. This COVID pandemic has definitely put a huge wrench and a huge stop to trade shows. But even before this happened, trade shows were evolving along with the changes in technology and society.
Yeah. And actually, they've been now more than ever, everyone, including, up until they really put a halt to it, trade shows, people, you were saying that they were evolving, they were forced to evolve really quickly.
Yeah.
On top of that.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see where that goes. So in terms of content marketing, what do you think are going to be, or what are trends that you're seeing now in the sort of COVID era? Or what do you think is going to last? Things like that. Like, what do you think is going to come out of this that's going to be sort of really great or sort of fall to the wayside?
Well, there's two things that I would look at. One is just the volume of content marketing. I think is going to go up because business to business companies are going to want to keep reaching their clients and trying to get their attention. And ever since the internet came along, the way to get people's attention is with great content that helps them to do their job better, that helps educate them, that helps them make better buying decisions. And trade shows have been a source for that, which is why people go to trade shows. It's one of the reasons is, the top reason is they want to see new products, but they also want to learn about the developments in their industry, what the buzz is in their industry. They want to do other things that are content related, like meet people and network, and also find services and products that they can buy. So as trade shows are on pause and business companies are looking, how can they reach their customers? They'll do more stuff with content marketing is one of those ways to do that, because it helps move people along the buying process, but it also is a great help for companies' search marketing results. So that it's going to just accelerate, or at least temporarily accelerate, the interest in digital marketing, which is already there. So I think that's how content marketing is going to be affected by this. The other aspect is the idea of what content. And because of the COVID pandemic, you've seen everybody come out with an email that starts, "In these troubled times,"
right?
Yeah.
And I got to overkill with that, and people saying we care. I've gotten emails from people I'd forgotten I did business with 5 years ago, saying things like, what we're doing to help people in this time of COVID. And I think companies figured out eventually that's not smart anymore. It's just kind of falling on deaf ears. So companies are having to adjust their content strategies to be more about compassion and about support It's for many companies, it's really hard to push products at this time because in some cases their industry is completely shut down or paused. In others, their clients are forced to do less because they're just not making enough money to be buying.
Yeah.
And others are like, we're doing good or doing fine, and we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing, but just shift more to the digital platforms. The first place that people shifted to in a big way was we want to replicate what trade shows provide, which is that live experience with lots of people to interact and develop relationships and meet vendors. And so they shifted to virtual platforms to do that. And that's worked well for content learning. It doesn't work as well for networking. It works somewhat surprisingly for finding people who are interested in products buyers. But that's mostly content driven. Some of these platforms on the virtual side are able to create breakout rooms. And with the advent of marketing automation, which has helped digital marketers track people's digital body language, that is infused into these some of these virtual programs. After a virtual event, there's a footprint that people have shown their interest in through what they've consumed, which content they've consumed, and how they've interacted. That's providing leads. Whether those leads will have the same kind of close rate that you can get from a live event, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see actually that shift because you and I just touched on it last time when we spoke, but what I saw when everything was sort of shutting down was that people were saying, okay, we got to make the move to digital. And then I heard a lot of companies who, trade show organizers, I should say, who are already sort of on that path and doing a complimentary digital event. And it just sort of worked out. And like you said, there's all these sort of breakout rooms and things that they can do. But I think one of the interesting things is it's really easy to say we have to go digital. It's another thing in terms of seeing what are the issues with your audience around digital. So even when it comes to, webinars at home, when everybody's working from home, everyone's really working on different timelines now. Everything seems like it's like an easy shift to digital, but it's not as, I should say, simple as when everybody's sort of 9 to 5, they're going to be in the office. You can potentially have an audience within that time frame. Now everybody's sort of doing things on their own, wants to listen to the recording later on.
Yeah.
So the experience of that networking or even just the sort of back and forth conversation in the chats like you can have on webinars is not there. But I have seen a big boost on sort of just live conversations, live chats, even on LinkedIn. Which I think is really interesting, and people can kind of jump on, hop in, hop out. Do you see a difference or do you see any challenges now going forward with these sort of traditional organized online events versus live, and which one would be better?
I don't really know how that's going to shake out. I would guess is the people who have the relationships with the audience and can gather a big audience and also get a diverse audience and an expert audience, both from the audience standpoint and also from the expert presenter standpoint. The traditional media companies and the big media companies that own multiple events, and then also the associations that have the memberships and the relationships, they should be able to put on the best events because they've been doing it and it's just in a new format. There may be somebody who comes in as an upstart and says, hey, there's an opportunity to disrupt the entire ecosystem. But I think the incumbent advantage in relationships and lists and educational content should persist for quite a while. Especially when you see as we move towards the future, we're going to see more of the hybrid event where we're going to restart the trade show aspect, the live aspect, but we've learned our lesson now. We're seeing more people who want to be involved in a digital fashion live by participating from our event, and we're getting larger audiences than we thought we would from the hybrid. And then also as over time, there will likely be reluctance from everybody to say, yes, I want to get in that plane and fly in, take a taxi and get in a hotel and walk in a hall with all these people. That's probably going to take time for some people to do that. And also in some corporations, they're just not going to allow their employees to get on that plane. Not yet.
How do you see that then? Like, how do you see people going to be able to close leads and generate business? I know there's obviously the traditional marketing, which we haven't touched, sort of the online digital marketing, but not everyone is great at doing that. And a lot of companies, even big companies, have a presence, but maybe they don't have the audience. You see some big companies who, let's say on LinkedIn, don't even have a fraction of what they should have,
Yeah.
How do you think they're gonna
Adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah, or cut through the noise of
Yeah.
so much information that is out there. That's one of the challenge I see, is there's already so much in that sort of platform, or is not platform, but that channel, it's difficult to be going to cut through.
I mean, even just the emails that you were saying is a great example, right?
Yeah.
Like I too, everybody sort of got that email,
Yeah.
And how do you cut through that noise? How do you generate leads when you're not so good or not doing the greatest job on digital, or trying to go into a new live version or webinar or whatnot when you're not used to those type of events, online virtual events? What is your advice, let's say?
We talked about this on our last call, is that there's two kinds of trade show marketers. There's trade show marketers that work for a company that trade shows is core to their marketing plan, because their industry and their buyers, they go to big events, and that's where a lot of purchasing decisions are made. The nature of their products or services are such that people really need to see them face to face to feel comfortable making that purchase. And so they'll have one or more dedicated people on staff that do trade shows. It's core to what they do. But there's a much larger universe of companies where their marketing person does trade shows, and they do trade shows, and they do the content marketing, and they do the search marketing, and they do the email marketing, and the newsletter, and the website,
Exactly.
and the social media, and all of it. I got to go. That's you. The hand went up, right? So you're like, I've got to book this show that's in 3 months' time, and I got to send out the tweet for the day. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's their life. And those people are going to have an easier time adjusting because they've already got other things that they've been working on. It's just, are they going to be able to expand into their other methods well enough to meet that need of providing leads for their sales force? Or is the sales force going to have to start picking up the slack and doing more networking on LinkedIn themselves? Is the company going to expand into more paid social media? Are they going to, now we got to do our own webinars. How are they going to be able to stand out? It's going to be the one with the best content wins at that point. When Skyline started doing content marketing many, many years ago, and when Skyline was first doing it, we had open field. It was the Exhibitor Show and Exhibitor Magazine, it was the Trade Show Exhibitor Association, and it was Skyline. And the quantity and quality of what we put out was up there. And we had a survey showing we were like the third highest. Skyline was the third highest source of education for exhibitors in the country. Now everybody's doing some kind of content, right? You're doing it at a location in Montreal as one of the Skyline offices. You see many different companies, and that's just an example of what it's like for every industry where there's that much more content. So marketers have to be savvier and better about coming out with content that's relevant and matters to their audience to get their attention. So that's one side. The other side, the people who trade shows are central to what they do. This is going to be tougher. Then it's like, well, how do we create something similar that's a face-to-face opportunity for people to look at our products and meet and get content if that's what they're looking for, but to create that buying moment. And that means if it's not going to happen at a big national event, there was an article in the last week or so where an epidemiologist was interviewed by a really good event blogger, Julian Solins. The takeaway was big national shows, not so much. That's going to take a while for those to come back to normal, but local, that can work, and smaller can work. So can larger corporations or smaller corporations duplicate in repetition smaller and local events in a way where people don't have to get on a plane to fly to an event? They can drive there, and that the people that are local, you're not worrying about moving that pandemic around, right?
Right.
There have been shows, I think in the United States, you're seeing interest level in getting shows restarted, and they're pointing to examples of what's happening around the world. There's 3 places that have started having shows that's caught attention: China, Hong Kong, and Korea. Sorry, I take that back. One of them is also Germany. And so there's 4.
Yeah.
The show that was in Hong Kong was a wedding show. And they said, hey, all the people are going to come to this. They're local exhibitors, they're local attendees. It's not people from international. And their case counts are so small. They've only had 4 deaths in Hong Kong. And yesterday they had 1 new case of COVID for the whole, for the whole country, city-state. And so they're not as concerned about having a trade show event because they're doing a huge number of precautions as part of that, but they just have so much lower incidence of new cases, and people are potentially undiagnosed walking around. In Germany, they had 607 cases yesterday. And so that's a much larger number. However, they were more than 10 times that back at the peak. So they've already brought it down quite a ways, and they're going to do a lot of stringent measures there. And I think that's something you want to talk about is how are trade shows going to deal with this, the new normal?
Yeah.
And they're getting a lot of people are looking at this because there's a lot of money on the line, and from different sources. There's the show owners that care a lot about getting trade shows up and running again because it's their single largest source of revenue, either as a media company. If you went back a couple of decades ago, they were magazine companies. That was their big source of revenue. Now trade shows and events, that's their biggest source. Magazines are a lot thinner. People look up information on the internet. They go to trade shows because it's a live experience and they get to meet and see things face to face. So they've evolved. And the associations that put on their own events, that's what pays for everything else, is the big annual show for their event or their series of smaller shows. So trade shows are going to do everything they can to evolve to be presented safer. In Germany, they successfully were able to get the government to say trade shows are different than other kinds of events. And so they're going to be treated differently in terms of being allowed to happen, right? And so they're already giving them the green light to start happening in the next several months in a couple of the regions, including the areas with the largest trade shows in Düsseldorf and Cologne. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Europe, Germany, if not worldwide, is like the trade show capital.
Yeah, I've been a few times for the toy industry in Nuremberg is the biggest toy fair in the world. So in February, it's a pretty big deal.
So Germany has...
Or January, sorry about that, yeah.
They have an association called ALMA that has produced the factoid saying that 2/3 of the biggest show in any industry, every industry, is in Germany. It's a German show. The German shows are in cities like, said, in Nuremberg, where the show hall, in many of these cities, the show hall is owned by the city and the show itself is owned by the city. So the government itself is pretty motivated to see trade shows come back because it's a source of income and it's a source of commerce. It's not just the revenue that it brings in. In the United States, the number is thrown around, it's around $100 billion in direct spending on trade shows for North America. But it's also the commerce it produces. People come to that show and they buy something. And the reason why they succeed is because it's profitable for the exhibitor. And if they're spending all this money to go to a show and the attendee is spending money and then they're creating commerce, then the multiplier is even larger.
It's almost pivotal to restarting the economy in certain locations, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think in a place like Germany, where it's so central to their economy, I think that's one of the reasons why the German economy is so strong is because they host all those trade shows and people come from all over the world and they end up making it easier for German companies to find buyers from all over the world.
You said something about how Hong Kong is put on their show and it was a lot more local based.
Yep.
Countries, I should say, have clearly an interest, in trying to restart trade shows, but on a global scale. But in the interim, companies who, have those trade show marketers who are solely focused on trade shows who can't go to trade shows are trying to figure out what they can do either virtually or to recreate that relationship, that buying mode relationship that trade shows usually have. How do you think they're going to be able to do that? Like first of all, how can you recreate that buying mode? Because that's when you go to a trade show and, you're building those leads. It really is really different when you're in person than it is trying to create a funnel online or a landing page or view my product. And some companies can't even, just the buying cycle, like you absolutely need to see the product or you need to talk to the expert or you need to, over a span of years, visit the plant or do something like that.
One of the top reasons why attendees go to trade shows is the ability to see multiple vendors at one time. And that's a big attraction. But then that means being in this room with lots of people. Corporations can, if they're good with their digital marketing and with their database, they can be looking at how they can do what you said, the plant visit. Can they create their own events in one or more cities where it's at their own facility or at another facility that they give enough reason for buyers to come in who are driving across town, not flying across country, to come in and either see some information and then see some products or just see products. I think that's a viable thing. And one of the messages I'd like to say to the listeners is if you are a trade show exhibitor, take care of your trade show suppliers because this has been incredibly hard on the trade show industry. They have laid off a lot of people. They're losing money all the way up and down the supply chain. Somebody called it that supply chain, all the different parts of the trade show industry. And many exhibit companies have shifted focus to try and do things like provide personal protection equipment or internal barriers. If there's ways that you can be buying those products from them to help you open up your own business, you can make sure that when trade shows do come back, you're not left with three choices and a monopoly, right?
Absolutely.
You want to make sure that so many of the companies that work in this industry are smaller entrepreneurial companies, and this is taking longer than expected to turn around, and so they need help. You can also be working with the exhibit houses like yours to be building out places like showrooms or executive briefing centers within your facility to take those display assets that you have and repurpose them in a way that you can be hosting more guided presentations, just like you would at a trade show. And then also developing tours within your plants where you have the right messages and the right backdrops and stations to make your story as you walk people through your facility. And that's something that is going to open up a lot sooner. So that's where I think people can shift their time and energy into. In the meantime, smaller local events. And even before the pandemic, companies were doing more of their own hosted events. There was a greater shift into that. And I think that's just going to accelerate even more.
Yeah. It makes for a very good image and a very good story as well. When you bring it down to that level, it's almost like it becomes a personal relationship when you invite people home, right? And then it's also more efficient, I think.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have no competition.
Yeah.
You're hosting your own event. It's like you have everybody's undying attention.
Yeah.
The only issue is you have a higher threshold to get them to come. But when they come, there's a much more likelihood that they're going to buy. And so it's a smaller group, but you're dealing with, more qualified prospects in the first place.
Just to talk a little bit about also, to go back a little bit, to content.
I'd like to also add to your question another aspect of that.
Yes, go ahead.
The idea of, how does a marketer do this? Well, if you're not going to get the quantity of leads you're getting from the trade shows, that's the big shows, look at the local regional shows that are likely to open up first. Some companies are regional, some countries are national, some are international. Do you have relationships with good vendors, good dealers, distributors who are in those locations that they don't have to fly? They can be hosting it, and you're working more a hub and spoke to help them host or attend local events. They're the ones who are doing more of that face-to-face for you because they can do that. But another aspect is these smaller events can be vertical market events. And some of the most successful trade show marketers have figured out that they may have buyers that look pretty broad when you look at them from the beginning in terms of, what their job title is or the size company and those things. But when you analyze closer, you can find vertical markets within there, kinds of industries that are sub-buyers that they have a much higher average purchase and a much higher likelihood to buy. And if you can identify those sub-industries, then instead of putting your energy into the bigger national shows that aren't going to come back as soon, put your energies into identifying and going after those vertical markets that are likely to produce higher dollar and more profitable sales.
Yeah.
But that takes research to do, but it's worth it. It was worth it to do a year ago. It was worth it to do 10 years ago. But it's really worth it now.
What would you say is, if you had to give people not only to just pull you on advice, but what would you say would be like the top 3 things that marketers should be focused on right now during this time?
We've reviewed quite a few things. I think the first thing I'd be doing is understanding where your digital marketing can be expanded that has been the most profitable, but also has the most application, like content marketing, that you can turn around and use that even back into your live events. Whatever you learn there will be applicable to your live events. You can be doing presentations in your booth based on what you've created for a digital white paper, right? I think the other thing is getting a better sense of, as these show owners put on hybrid events, how do you maximize the technology they have to generate leads out of those events, the virtual events? I'd be looking at how you can do your own events locally in locations and potentially in your facilities. And then the vertical market strategy, looking at vertical market events.
More from this interview after this short break. Clear plexi panels provide an unintrusive and safe professional aesthetic to revamp any office space. Great for separating desks in an open concept layout or create added protection for reception counters when welcoming guests. Contact Skyline Entourage at 514-780-8810 to discuss how we can help you get back to business safely. That's 514-780-8810 or visit us at our website at skylineentourage.com for more details.
I think that's really interesting because we haven't seen too many of these events happen. I know there's definitely a lot of conferences out there that you can join and that have that sort of online platform, but an actual trade show or commerce exchange hasn't really taken place. And I've brought this example a few times, but Toy Fair launched their Toy Fair Everywhere, which I think is happening in August, if I'm not mistaken. It's still scheduled for August, but it's in junction with their trade show that they had to pause. But it is interesting to see like what is going to be the platform for commerce. Again, how do they generate leads out of that virtually? And is this something that people are going to need to learn to do, accept to do? Is it a different even sales process? Is it a different sales approach virtually online? And what kind of even just preparing materials that marketing people would have to prepare for that type of event? I just find it really interesting because it's definitely going to be different. I mean,
yeah. And companies that have been doing the digital marketing and have outlined a funnel and how people work through their website and how then they work through the buying process, they already have a head start on that. Now it's something that you're doing for this live event. It's similar to, you got a lead on your website, someone asks for a white paper. Now what do? How do you push them further down the buying cycle, until they get to the point where they're interested in actually, writing you a check. There have been shows that have been surprising. I'm looking for the article about it. There's so much content out there about this. Everybody's desperately writing about it.
I know.
And I found an article that had profiled 3 or 4 events where they were surprised at how these event organizers felt it had worked for them to do a virtual event more than they expected, because they had larger crowds there, but they also had people engaged longer, and they were able to track the engagement, and they were able to find out what people had expressed interest in by actually either asking about it or by where they put their attention in the different potential sessions that were there. And so then now they've got some data packet here. How does that get in the hands of a salesperson? How does that get into a database so that it gets followed up? Much like the big issue of after a trade show, how do you make sure that whatever that conversation was in the booth is passed on intact to the salesperson so that they can make a good follow-up call, and they know the 10 leads that they were given, the 2 that are the most valuable that they need to follow up on first. Those processes need to be smoothed out.
Yeah, and I can see that it's definitely going to be something that is going to be paid, because at a trade show, you're making money from this. Well, the organizers are making money, obviously, various ways, but on services and whatnot, but the space that people are buying, the space that people are renting, and the leads that you're collecting, they're not collecting the leads for you, you're collecting the leads for yourself. So the onus is on you to make sure that you have a good process and, like you said, follow-up process with sales and good relationships with those people. So you make sure, hey, here's the leads that I got, here's what so-and-so said, A, B, and C, or D. But when the virtual event is happening and the show organizer now has all that data, I'm wondering if they're going to turn around and sell it to the particular individual companies, I should say, or how they're just going to use that to improve the experience for the attendees. Because it can't just be of course it has to be a two-way street. It has to be attendee experience is number one, but definitely the companies have to see that ROI.
It's a legit issue. You have someone who the organizer says, based on their feedback and their activity, this person is interested in product A. We have 35 vendors who sell product A that are part of our ecosphere. Do we give them all that same one, or is it like you only get the lead based on how much you sponsor or how much activity you created in a breakout session? Or that's a whole different dynamic, which gets in the idea of a hybrid event. It's really hard to get so granular as you can in a live event. In a live event, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations happening simultaneously. There's just so much going on, and to try and replicate that digitally in calling it one event, it's a tremendous, difficult proposition to duplicate.
What kind of conversations have you been having with your clients? I mean, you don't obviously have to name any names, but what kind of conversations or worries or plans or setups that have moves that have had to be done now in order to work through this time, or even just adjust their plans?
My clients are pretty much, it's exhibit companies. as opposed to the trade show exhibitors. And the exhibitors, they're doing things differently. There's been a couple of good surveys, one by Exhibitor Magazine's done one recently, where they asked both exhibit suppliers and exhibitors, how are you adapting to this? And, where they're shifting their money and their time. The people I deal with more closely, exhibit vendors, this is really incredibly hard situation for them, where they've laid off most of their staff temporarily. They are worried about how they're going to make ends meet. And they're worried about how are they going to retain their best people that they're not going to pick up and go to some other industry.
Yeah.
And they're trying to adapt. First, they try to adapt by, hey, you need a banner stand behind you for your Zoom call, or let's see, can we help set up testing sites or set up with temporary hospitals, which almost everyone that's been put in a convention center has been disassembled. The efforts to flatten the curve for the most part worked. So we didn't get the big spikes like they saw in Italy, and our hospitals weren't overwhelmed. And so we had them set up as a contingency plan, but fortunately they weren't really needed. Yeah. So now the shift is business is opening up. Hey, we're starting to see relaxation of the social distancing measures, where it's not stay at home, it's stay safe, go out and interact, but do it with a mask on, with the proper amount of distance, and keep washing your hands and all these things. If you're sick, don't go out, monitor your temperature. And so all these things that are happening now, it's like, well, if business is going to open up, they don't want to get their employees sick or their visitors sick. They don't want it spreading. So exhibit houses have shifted into, how can we help you ensure that is done safely? And I know your group with Seb did a fantastic webinar, I think, outlining, the legal issues and what the government recommendations were from Canada, and then how to actually build it out and the resources.
Thank you.
And I'll say that again, if you're listening and you're an exhibit marketer, a trade show marketer, work with your exhibit houses, because they understand how to build out spaces temporarily, and they also understand how to do graphic messaging to make sure it's actually understood and conveyed in three-dimensional spaces, so that you can create a safe environment for your employees and for your workers. So I think that's a shift that's happened with exhibit houses. They're also looking at other markets that they can take their expertise into. But some of those are also being affected by the same issues of, stay at home.
Yeah.
At least they have been.
I find that, at least what I've felt, like you were saying, that the shift in what companies have had to do has been changing so quickly. So just the marketing aspect of it feels very volatile, because on one hand, you're focused on, okay, I got to get this message out. We got to fix these funnels, fix these channels, whatever's broken on, go fix it now. Produce more content on one thing, and then boom, another shift. And then boom, another shift. Mm-hmm. And it's happened within, we're talking in a 2-month time frame, exactly. Which has felt like a year.
Did a few times in 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. I know Dom and I, we've all had discussions like, what's next? What's going to happen? What's the next project? Almost looking at it project by project. Definitely has felt that way. And I think now, we were talking about content before, companies who've already sort of had a good base on the digital side of marketing, or who have those audiences already, definitely will be ahead of the game in that sense. But I think where we're sort of all on the same playing field is just the amount of content that's out there, and sort of getting through the noise. Because I think part of, yes, value-based content is important. We can't get away from that. But at the end of the day, it's also, I would say, and depending on the channel, but for a lot of them, it's just the amount of content that you can put out. The more the merrier, or the more the opportunity people see you. It's almost having a team focused on solely putting out content, even if it's not 100% related to your product, but maybe it's related to, like what we were saying, how can we help you get back to business? Or here's what's happening in the regulations, just trying to support your audience. Content
marketing, I found that, I told you this before, the 3 words I use to guide content marketing: is it useful? Is it insightful? Is it entertaining? You're creating content that is one or more of those, then you're doing really good. And I used to mistakenly think that all content marketing was about getting people into the top of the funnel, getting people to put their hand up and just say, yes, I'm interested in getting some information from you. And it can be just related to their job, how to do their job better. Mm-hmm. I have learned the errors of my way that a lot of really good content is mapping the entire buying process for your client, understanding when they don't even know what the problem is yet, but they know they have a problem, or getting them to understand they have a problem, talking in terms of generally big, broad search terms, about what they're looking for and how to help them make that buying decision, and moving all the way through the buying cycle where they're getting into consideration and decision. And they have different needs, different levels of information that they're willing to have. If you give somebody information that's appropriate to the end of the buying cycle too early, they're going to balk. But at the end, you need that to help close. And you have to do it in a way that is still seen as objective and helpful and interesting and funny and visual and all of that. So content marketing, I think that that understanding how to do it well, you can save a lot more time on where you're going with it if you've got a good sense of your client buying cycle and what the words that matter most to them. And then that'll slow your churn or your wasted effort and reduce that and make it so you can create content that's more applicable.
It's almost nice that like at this, well, I shouldn't say maybe not nice, but it's a positive that some companies who don't necessarily have the staff or the resources right now to sort of get full-fledged, get back into working or whatnot, can take the time to do those things. We mentioned it before in terms of what should people be doing right now, understanding your sales cycle, understanding the words that matter to your audience, making sure that, your funnels actually are functioning the way they should be, or that your SEO is up to date on your website, or, repurposing new content that could be useful to your audience, right?
That's all really good digital marketing, content marketing things people can be doing. I think another aspect is your trade shows or displays are sitting on the shelf. You're not overwhelmed with logistics of handling those back and forth. You can take some time to really look at your overall trade show program as well. And this can apply when trade shows restart, or also to apply to your other marketing efforts. That would be looking at your customers, really understanding your customers well. I talked about the vertical market aspect. That's a key part of it. But if you know what your best customers look like, then you can do a better job of finding shows that have those people. You can also be doing return on investment analysis on the shows that you had in the past. It's, time is passing. You've had the buying cycle go through some, look at the shows from a year ago, 2 years ago, compare your leads from those shows to the sales results that came, look at your costs and get a sense of what shows have the best ROI. And that can help guide you in your future trade show activity, but also saying, well, this kind of show did well, we should be concentrating on that from our digital marketing as well. So there's opportunities there. That will help you decide how you train your booth staffers. It'll help you decide what promotions you get if you have a better understanding what your client looks like, what promotions are going to light up their eyes as opposed to being blah. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't fit my demographic. I thought was a really cool promotion at that show for Skyline, where we had 2-foot-long remote controlled trucks and we raced them in a circle. And that was with time trials to win a prize. It was really fun and we had a lot of attention. But I went out to the aisle and I saw this woman sitting there and she had in her hand a glass of champagne and a chocolate dipped strawberry. And that's what she got from another booth. And I'm like, would you like to try racing our trucks here? And she said, boys were the toys. Well, exhibitor shows 70% women is the buying audience. So I had this really great promotion that isn't appealing to everybody as well as it could have. So when you know your audience demographic, you can come up with better promotions and activities in the booth. So this is the time to really dig in and do that research as well.
I actually had a question. We sort of surveyed our team and we had questions and said, you have to ask questions to Mike, what's one of them? And one of the questions was, what was the most successful trade show marketing promotion that you've seen or used? And why do you think it was successful? But it's interesting just to bring a parallel though, because I've noticed that it happens definitely to everybody. What you think is successful, and then only afterwards, sometimes a lot of trade show marketers or just marketing people in general don't even have the time to do the proper follow-up or the sort of debrief as to, was that really that successful? It might have drawn a crowd. Was it the right crowd? You only kind of find out after the leads, if they're followed up properly.
Yes. Yeah, because when the trade show's done and you hand off this big stack of leads and, then you go on to the next thing because you were out of the office all that time. You really need to have a dedicated person whose job is to make sure trade show leads are followed up. It's an investment, but it pays off so much when you have that. But to be fair, I think with the web-based CRM systems that are out there now, it's a lot easier for exhibitors to get better data on what's happening to their trade show leads.
Absolutely.
Than ever before. It's easier to see if they're getting followed up or to be able to track your ROI.
So would you say then that was your best trade show promotion?
I don't know. I don't know if that was it. We've had some that have been pretty great. We had one a few years ago when we launched Windscape that we had after the show, the show did a survey saying, hey, which unaided recall, which exhibitor do you remember seeing? And Skyline had by far and away the top number. It was like 24% of the show said they saw our booth, and we were number one with that. And what we did is we just demoed all day Windscape. We had this table there and set it up, and people would hear it and they'd see it, and someone would be off the side talking about it while people came up, and the engineer would be doing the demo, and it just made it really, really obvious. We did one promo that it was back during the dot bomb time period, and we mailed out a message in a bottle. It was sand and shells inside of it and a little message in a scroll. And it went to them, and you open up the inside, it said marooned on your island exhibit. So all these people, they're stuck with all this heavy exhibit, and they didn't have the money to spend on it. Well, come look at our modular portable stuff. And we all dressed in Hawaiian shirts, and we offered a trip to Hawaii.
Oh, that's cool.
And the person that won it ended up later buying a 60 by 30 booth and then became an employee. So I was like, that one worked.
Yeah, that one worked for sure.
That was a win-win-win-win.
It was. We actually tracked how many people came into the booth because of the promotion we were giving out, enticing people as they walked by the aisle, and also through a pre-show. And it was like 60% of the attendees were interacted with the promotion. So that was successful, I think, especially considering the time frame that we were dealing with.
Have you been hearing of any newer trade show promotions that through the exhibit houses or anything like that, just before all this kind of went down?
I did a survey for another company on trade show promotions. What were the most successful ones that people liked? And technology really is interesting. Technology. People like technology a lot to offer it, and they feel it's successful. Usually it's stuff that, it can be big ticket stuff. It's usually the idea of, I'm going to offer up a treat that somebody would like to have, but they aren't going to spend that much of their own money to get, right? So in the past, way distant past, it was the iPad, then it's turned into the drone, then now it's like the Nintendo stick, the games, it's the wireless headphones, it's all those noise canceling ones, it's all these things that people go, oh, that's really cool. I'm not going to buy it though. Oh, you can come get it for free. And then they come and they want it. So, and then there's others. I think that has been a common theme is technology seemed to be very popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even just the integrated technology into the experience. I know, Dom, you guys definitely did something. I forget where you said that was, but a Lego.
Yeah. And these are the things I want to be careful and not talk about my opinion too much, but these are the stories, and you mentioned a few earlier, that makes me believe that trade show might be on a pause, but it is a pause, and there will be more digital adventures and different venues. But I don't think trade shows are going anyway just because of those stories. A couple of activation that we did, and for us was a little bit different back then because we were not exactly selling to the audience. We were building a brand and showcasing product, toys in this example. So for us, I remember one time we went at BlizzCon, we had this license based on video games. We set up just play tables that we used to bring here and there. And we used to pull out those giant bins full of construction blocks that were just mixed. And we just put it on the table. And then we said to people, just make and take was sort of like the motto. So anything that they could make, they can take home. And then they would look at us and it's like, really? It's like, yeah, just make it and you take a picture, share it, and then take it home.
There you go. Get that social media share out of it.
Exactly. So these kind of stories and these kinds of activations for me are so real. Before the pandemic, I would have told you that trade shows are all about what social media is not. You take a picture, you see pictures, you see things online. When you have the opportunity to go someplace and experience it, there is the value of a trade show for me. It's about the business, of course, but it's also about an experience. You're visiting a city, you're visiting, a location, you're meeting people. It's very different than screen times, right? For me, that's the big pull for trade show is all about real experiences. So I think, and I'm sure Mike agrees, I don't think trade shows are going anywhere because they're important, but they also touch on a very human connection that we all need, I believe.
Yeah, there's a tremendous value to that face-to-face event. The variable is how long it's going to take for it to be safe
Yeah.
enough that people are going to feel comfortable to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Asia, the countries that are looking to have these events again or have started, they've gotten their number of new cases down to less than you're seeing in like a county in the United States or, a section of a state. So there's much less worry about it. But, the pandemic has the potential to last for not weeks or months, but even, years. And how long it's going to take for that to be comfortable for people to go, especially as they get more and more research finding out, like there was a study in Japan that showed people are 19 times more likely to get infection from COVID indoors than outdoors. So, that's another place where people can be looking at doing events is, can they host an event outdoors? Is there a way? And then that gets harder to do with an exhibit, but it can be done with tents that are open, get that air flowing through so people don't get a concentrated dose of the virus to enough that it takes hold. People want to go back really badly on 3 levels: the attendees, the vendors, and the show owners. All 3 want to do this. It's just the same thing that's happening for the rest of the economy. The virus is in the way. And once it gets low enough in its new cases and incidents, and there's enough ability to test, trace, and isolate, there's a vaccine, there's herd immunity, whatever it is, when we get there, they're going to come back in a big way. I mean, look what happened in Georgia. They opened up their bars and people were driving down to Georgia to go to the bars, right? And I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the Ozarks where it looked like a human soup bowl, right? Lake of the Ozarks. There's a lot of desire for people to get out and integrate with their fellow man, right? And woman. They just want to. We're driven to do that.
And it's also, they want the experience, right? And Dominic, you were talking about that and it made me think of something because I'm thinking to myself, okay, for sure, a portion's going to go digital, a portion of virtual, we're going to have to sort of deal with that. But again, how do you create that experience and can people get that? I think to a certain degree, maybe this, I don't want to generalize generations, but it could be that the younger generations are going to have an easier time with that because they're already so used to social medias like Snapchat, where the experience is sort of the filters or the the fun things that you can do that you can share. And so it's sort of maybe creating those types of moments, but I haven't seen it go further than that, or to be honest, I haven't done too much research into just more than just what is a filter and shareable, hashtags and that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of where we're going to see maybe an opportunity for innovation in terms of creating an experience online for people that is shareable.
I think it has to be a different thing. One of the mistakes I see people doing is they're trying to replicate the same thing, but online. I think you have to be more creative than that and do something completely different. It's a hard way, of course, but you have to come up with something different. Otherwise, it's just not working.
Otherwise, it's like a watered down version of a lemonade.
Exactly. Or it suspiciously look like the internet at large, like I'm just going around surfing on website and
exactly.
Absolutely.
There's no value.
So I have one more question from our team that they wanted to know. Okay. She said, what do you think the difference is in the approach, or what is the difference between B2B and B2C trade show marketing? And I'll add to that, what do you think is going to change when we return for the 2 variables?
I'm just going to go based on the 2 things, local and small, is being where it's going to open up first.
Yes,
and local
exactly.
will be a lot easier for B2C than B2B. They tend to gather in big places or, getting a large group across state lines because they need that many people to have a big enough nexus for the content to matter and to get people's attention. Consumer stuff, you can do it on the street corner,
right?
And it gets done on the street corner in live experiential marketing all day long. So I think the consumer can happen a lot sooner because of that. The content, what's their content? They're giving away a free sample. They're doing some kind of a cool interactive. They're doing some activation. They can build that activation as a one-off for themselves and make it so that it has social distancing built into the experience right from the beginning. And when you're talking about a B2B thing, if it's their own event, then they can do that as well. But if it's at an event that's hosted by someone else, now you're dealing with multiple people and you've got to deal with that issue. There may be more to it, but to me, that's the most basic and probably the most overriding factor.
No, and I don't disagree. Like you said, we sort of touched on it a few times already, but it's, trying to create the buying mode or an opportunity to generate that introduction with somebody. And how do you do that in this time or even going forward with half your audience at home, not on the same schedule, potentially laid off, you're reaching out, you're sending out emails to deaf ears sometimes.
Right.
B2B definitely a struggle right now, that's for sure.
Well, you look at air travel in North America is down 95%.
Going home.
And that remaining 5%, it's the people on the planes are like airline employees and medical people, right? So there's just so much less. But if you go out into the world, like I go on my neighborhood and the streets are filled with people going for walks. And if you go to the lake, because Minneapolis, city of lakes, Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. There's lakes everywhere, but there's the ones where people go and they have beaches. If someone was to do a consumer event there that was tied to their brand, but also tied to COVID, and they would have a ton of people coming by, right? The consumer people, they have an opportunity to engage, I think, a lot sooner as long as people are out and about. Maybe not the business buyer, because the business buyer is standing at home, but there's a lot of people who, yes, they're staying at home, but they're getting outside to exercise.
Are there any subjects that you wanted to touch on that maybe we didn't press hard enough or get into? Because I know you had some good points, and I hope we covered a lot of them.
I'm looking at my notes that I had, and I'm not seeing anything that we haven't covered. I think we've gotten there. We've gone around the different aspects. There's a lot to cover here. We haven't really dealt into the exact statistics and this show specifically, and that information is out there in the world. There's a few good sites that are covering this. Skyline's got some information on their site. Exhibitor Magazine, TSNN, Trade Show Executive, Event Manager Blog. There's a number that have been covering this very heavily. For example, tsnn.com, I used to have blog posts on there, and I'd be really happy when it would get a share of like 50 or 60 shares, because some of them don't get 10 or 20. They had a post about what's going on with COVID and what the major players are doing to try and make things safer, from the Hilton Hotel and Marriott Hotel to the hotel organizations, all these different groups. And it had over 5,000 shares. So there's a lot of interest in this for people. They're paying incredibly close attention to what's the status and how our businesses and associations adapting to make it so we can open this up again. The only thing I would just, is there's some people who want to see it open up right now because the economic imperative of their own business and it's needing it to be safe is hard to manage that goal with my businesses going under. So it's trying to find the happy medium there when maybe there can never be a happy medium.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow in this time right now for everybody, really. Just even understanding that from just a human aspect. I hear people like when businesses are going under and I think, oh my God, like what would I do? What do you do? What can you do?
Adapt. Yeah,
the buzzword of COVID. Pivot, adapt.
Pivot rhymes with COVID.
Yeah.
But I think this has been great. I think we've covered a lot of topics. And Dom, unless you have something else that you wanted to touch on.
No, we covered all my notes quite fast in the conversation. So I think we could keep going on many different subjects, but I think this has been a very informative meeting, Mike. And thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it. And you guys are asking great questions. And I think you're doing a great service to your audience to approach this openly and to try and figure out where things are going to so that they can make the adjustments they need to keep things going within their companies and within their careers. Thank you both very much for hosting this.
Well, thank you.
Okay, à la prochaine.
Salut bien. Oh, merci beaucoup. Salut.
Salut, ça va? Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Tune in weekly for new interviews and head over to our website for more episodes. While you're there, be sure to head over to our COVID-19 Business Solutions page to see what we've been up to. Because what does an event company do when there are no events happening? Well, we've turned our attention to support our clients and other businesses in getting back to work safely. That's why our designers have customized our lineup of products to improve your space and, more importantly, allow for safe distancing without compromising looks. We're also really excited to introduce a new lineup of UVC lights that disinfect any space safely in minutes. and kills 99.9% of bacteria and viruses, including COVID-19. So don't forget to head over to our website at skylineentourage.com for more details on how we can help you. That's skylineentourage.com.